like to invite our dear friend, Dr. George Hafas.
Testing 1, 2. Could we hear? Lorena, thank you for your efforts, your tireless efforts to get this meeting together. I can't thank her enough. She's been a well of energies. I know you're running for public office. I wish you the best. Yeah. I think you're running for state representative for Middlesex, correct? Yes. Yep. I also do want to reiterate and thank the organizations that helped bring everybody here. I mean, you guys are the unsung heroes. So, Indivisible from, Lowell, Acton, Concord. Thank you. League of Women Voters. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And the church that sponsored and hosted us today. Thank you very, very much. And it's a pleasure to be here for the second time. And I'll sit down here and so get started. I need a microphone close. How's that? Much better? Thank you.
Is this good? Guys, can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
So, Dr. Papas, you're with us just a few months ago, but as we, all of us have been watching the videos, we know things move really fast, and a lot of things have happened. But before we go into those things, could you go back a little bit? I mentioned earlier you talked about the dark cloud that came over. Last time you were here, you talked to us about no one is safe. And so, looking back the past several months, can you walk us through about what you have seen, what you have heard and experienced that brought us to this moment today?
Thank you. I will. I was here around August 8th, and the dark clouds become darker. If you're a person that's living in the United States and you're undocumented, if the clouds were extremely dark, uh, the uh, the power that's unleashed by this government on its institutions, the assault on these institutions, have now intensified. Since I was here in August, uh, as an example, Immigration Customs Enforcement now believes that if you enter the country without permission, whether it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, that if you're arrested by Immigration Customs Enforcement, you are mandatorily detained and you don't have a right to ask or a bond. The good news, despite that erroneous interpretation of laws which had not changed, regulations which had not changed, what's changed is the government's interpretation. That's changed. For the last 30 years, the government had a certain interpretation that these folks were entitled to request a bond from detention. But something changed in June and July, mostly July. Fortunately, through the courage and the efforts of many immigration lawyers throughout the United States, as of last week, about 125 petitions, they're called habeas corpus petitions, and I'll go into that in a moment, have been filed with federal court, and about 120 have been granted. The federal courts have virtually said to the administration, what you're doing is wrong. And fortunately, these people are now being released solely for the purpose of being given an opportunity to ask and request a bond. And my colleague, Ms. Christina Tosinat Miller, will talk about that in more detail later on. But that is a change that's occurred since August the 8th. The immigration courts, I will tell you, are substantively dead. You're dead. 130 immigration judges since January 20th have either been fired or they've been forced to resign. 130 judges across the United States. They're now being replaced by lawyers from the military who know absolutely nothing about immigration law, and they're judges. That is a sorry state. So the immigration courts today exist only in name only, not in substance. The administration has done a pretty good job dismantling due process at these immigration courts. Their goal is to bypass immigration courts and detain people Even if they have a pending application for asylum, you want them detained. You want to apply for asylum? Well, maybe you'll have to sit here for 6 months to 2 years. And the chances of that happening for these people remaining in detention is very small. And they're going to probably ask to be self deported. They get out of jail, which is exactly what this administration wants. It's a policy of cruelty. That's what this is. I experienced the cruelty from the judicial side when I was told how to rule in specific cases. In May, for example, a convergence occurred between the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security. Traditionally, there's been a firewall between DOJ and DHS. The convergence meant that my leadership, the Executive Office of Immigration Review, was now working in tandem with the Department of Homeland Security to make it easier to deport people without a hearing. That's pretty serious stuff. And when I was confronted with that, I resisted. I did not follow the instructions of my chief judge because it was wrong. I resisted by putting on a public forum that all judges could see what our legal obligations were to these immigrants or respondents. They had an opportunity to learn what a motion to dismiss was. They didn't understand what that meant. They had a right to find out what the consequence would be if I did grant that motion. If they had an application for relief, I would ask them, do you still want to pursue that relief? If they said yes, I would deny the motion. In other words, I reviewed each respondent's case on their merits. I didn't follow a meeting that says just grant. Rubber stamp is not part of my vocabulary. I don't do that. So, but that happened in May. And where we did not grant those motions to dismiss, the immigrant or the respondent was allowed to leave the courtroom without being arrested. But that stopped in July, just after I left. Now, Immigration Customs Enforcement will arrest anybody, no matter what their immigration proceeding status is. The process is gone. It's really bad. I can go into more detail, but for the last 2-3 months, it's gotten more dangerous. And part of what we'll talk about today, you probably asked me about this, is what can you do to protect yourself? What can these immigrants do to protect themselves, both at home or in the public? I'm going to go into more detail. That's a short synopsis of what's happened since August the 8th.
Thank you for that. And we had talked, and you mentioned this quote that I really feel it deeply. No one is safe. And if you've all been watching the news, we have seen that it's citizens are being taken. And even if isn't a documented person, the means they are using and the ways they are treating these human beings, it's inhumane. So, as I mentioned earlier, it is very important that we have the power to know our rights. If we do encounter, for myself as a Brazilian American, for people who might have a green card, or even people here who are citizens but may look like they don't belong here. So, Judge, could you explain a little more this, when you talk about know your rights, right? What are the main things you'd like us to keep in mind?
Okay, 2 things. Rights in your home and rights in public. Those are the 2 areas you want to really focus on. If you are an undocumented person living at home and ICE wants to come into your home, but they're banging on the door at 3 in the morning or whatever, they don't have a right to come into your home unless 1, you give them permission. Or 2, they have a signed warrant by a judge, not by an administrative officer from Immigration Customs Enforcement. If they say they have a warrant, these people should not open the door. If they can avoid it, they should ask the officers to slide that warrant under the doors so they could see it. If the ICE officers violate the law and still come through the door or bang it down, my advice to the immigrant or the undocumented person is don't resist. Just tell them you're here without authorization, and later on, hopefully that evidence, anything that's acquired, will be tossed out in the judicial proceedings. They should not get into any fiscal confrontation. But that warrant is key for them to come into the house, a judicially signed warrant, not by an ICE administrative officer. Um, in public, the Supreme Court about, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 weeks ago, for the first time in my lifetime, now has legitimized that the police can stop someone based upon how they look, based upon how they sound, if they have an accent. This is the horror of all horrors. This has been sanctioned by the Supreme Court. Justice Kavanaugh is the one that you want to read in terms of his position and opinion on this. So ICE can now walk down the street and stop somebody just based upon the way they look and ask them about their immigration status. So let's say you're an individual, you've been profiled, and ICE stops. Who are you? What are you? Outside of your name, you don't have an obligation to tell them anything else. Zero. Do not tell them where you live. Do not tell them what country you're from. You should just ask them, can I leave? If the answer is yes, then you walk away slowly. It's over. If they say you cannot leave, your answer should be, I have a right to remain silent. I want to speak to my lawyer. Nothing else. Do not engage in a conversation with the officer. They want you to engage, but you don't have to. You have a right to remain silent. Do not resist. If you're a U.S. citizen, clearly now you may want to carry some legitimate proof of who you are besides your driver's license. Do we have to carry passports to prove we're U.S. citizens? Do we have to carry our birth certificates to prove we're U.S. citizens? Has it gotten that bad? Well, to the 170 U.S. Americans, citizens that were arrested, they would have needed those documents. But here, it's even worse. Some of them did have documents to show that they were citizens. ICE didn't care. They didn't want to look at the documents. They just wanted to arrest them and put them in detention and hold them for a day or 2 or 3. These are U.S. citizens. There was no what we call reasonable suspicion to stop these people. They're being stopped in front of their home. What the police have a right to do, if they have reasonable suspicion that you have maybe committed a crime, they can pat you down, a temporary stop. They see a bulge in your pocket, they can go in there, but that's it. So in public, you have the right to remain silent. Outside of your name, you do not have to reveal any other information. Ask if you're with free leave. If you are, leave slowly. Private property, remember, if it's not the house, it could be church. It's a business. If it's a business, it's private property. It's not public. They just can't march in there. They need a warrant. So these are some of the tools that you need to know about. If you go to my website, pathways-immigrations.com, we have a whole section just on know your rights that you print out, both for at home and in the public. I would suggest you do that just passing around.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, that's very good to know. So when we talk about all that happened and the person did end up getting arrested, that person now is having a hearing. And we've heard that bond denials have increased lately. We actually indeed had a case, an average of this young boy, 13-year-old, who was taken. And I couldn't believe that they denied his bond, and he actually self-deported or is about to. That's the last I heard from his attorney. So that is happening more and more. Can you speak to what the courts have been doing about, if they can't do anything about what's going on with that?
The answer is yes. The federal courts have stepped in and really put their foot down on what the administration is doing. I'm going to let Attorney Miller go into more detail when we get to that point, so I'm not going to overlap what she's going to say. But I will deviate a little bit outside of your question to just remind people that this is not just an immigration crisis. This is really important. The phrase is, no one is safe. The reason why none of us are safe is that all of our institutions are under assault by this administration. It's not just immigration courts. If we just confine this analysis just to immigration courts, we'd have no idea what the overall context involves here. So universities are under attack. They're being blackmailed. Their funding has been cut. The smokescreen is the administration is protecting Jews. Its smokescreen is that it's a issue of anti-Semitism. It's got nothing to do about anti-Semitism. The administration wants to dismantle what it considers to be a liberal education universe. That's their agenda. That's just universities. You can see from the Browns to the Harvards to the Dukes and Chicago, they're all being held as hostage right now. Sign on a dotted line or we will basically take you over. University of Virginia say, no. No, I'm sorry. Is it yes? Is the acquiesced? Harvard to be defended. So universities are one institution that's being attacked. You have the media. They've been attacked. Anything that promotes diversity, multiculturalism is a threat to this administration. And here's where it gets dangerous. Very dangerous. J.D. Vance is out there promoting an ideology that says who a real American is. This vice president says that you can only be an American if you have lineage in this country. Or as he says, dirt. Those are the real Americans, according to Mr. Vance, that have a privileged place in our society because they're the real Americans. Promoting immigration is a threat to that American or if you're a recent American that's been naturalized, well, you may have a naturalization certificate that says, I'm an American. But you'll go to the back of mine was what Mr. Vance has done and others is they've created a hierarchy of who an American is. Those at the apex, at the top of the hierarchy, have a privileged right to lead and decide how this country is going to be run and who stays and who goes. That is a blueprint for fascism. And Mr. Vance and his colleagues are advocating this. Don't take it from me. Just go to YouTube, click on J.D. Vance, click on National Conservative Convention, and hear it with your own ears. That's how dangerous this is. And that ideology explains, in some degree, the attack on all of these institutions. They call it woke. What they're doing is dismantling an apparatus which will give them free reign to control this country outside of what we have seen since the New Deal. So this racist ideology is driving in the train, not only attacking immigration courts, but it's attacking all our institutions and our administrative strength. That's why no one is safe. Your civil liberties are under threat right now. I'm telling, we are one major crisis away. If it's a 9/11, God help us. If there's a 9/11 tomorrow, there will be a state of emergency declared. There'll be no habeas corpus office threat under second. If you're perceived to be a threat, you'll be arrested indefinitely. Your passports will be frozen, can be countryed, bank accounts will be frozen. We are one threat away from that. And what's really dark is you have the military being hijacked to go into cities. And what this administration is looking to do is they're looking for violence. They are looking for a fight. The real shining star was the No Kings March about a week and a half ago. Like 7+ million people marched coast to coast. They're about it. They did not take the bait. These people did not take the bait. There was no violence. But if they get their violence, it's their excuse to bring in martial law. Of course, that means there won't be any elections next year. So keep that in mind. There's a darker agenda here. So immigration, the attack on judges, the attack on our courts, the threat to immigrants is part and parcel of a much wider threat to all of us. And that's what I mean. No one is safe.
Well, can we all just take a deep breath? So,
Okay. What Lorena just reminded me to do is to give you some practical information about how to help the community. Preparation is one thing I wanted to talk about. These undocumented people need to prepare for this hostile environment. And here's what they can do. They need to copy their birth certificates, their marriage certificates, their passports, their tax returns, just in case the family member is arrested and detained, that those papers are easily accessible. That's really important because if you have those key papers showing what the individual has done in terms of taxation, following the rules, maybe employment history, passports, the birth certificates, the marriage certificates, photographs of my family, all of this to humanize that person is critical when they ask for perhaps a bond. You got to convince a judge that you are not a flight risk and not a danger to the community. That's why these documents are so legal. Ooh, power of attorney. They've got children and families. What if a parent is arrested and detained? Who's going to take care of the children? Who's going to have the authority to go to a bank account? Who's going to have the authority to go to school for the children's eye? So a power of attorney is a great tool, or guardianship. A power of attorney is something that many families should write up, sign up, and have it just in case someone is detained. And there's an immediate protocol, a legal protocol to take care of the children, protecting finances, and so forth. And each power of attorney will be unique to the family's circumstances. It should not be left unwritten. This is something that they can do to prepare in case of a calamity where someone is detained indefinitely. So that's my second advice on preparation. Also, U.S. citizenship, the gold star of where we're going with immigration. This is where people ultimately want to go. They want to get citizenship. They want to be part of this country. The government has now made that much more different. One of the requirements of citizenship used to be, well, tell us where you've lived for the last 5 years. Well, in the old days, you'd say, well, I lived at this address for 5 years, or I lived here, and that was good enough. Maybe you had some bills, utility bills that show you lived in those places for 5 years. That was good enough. Not anymore. Now, the United States Citizenship and Immigration Service has hired fraud investigators. There's going to be thousands of these folks that are actively looking for fraud. So in the context of U.S. citizenship, they're going to be looking at where you live for the last 5 years. They're going to go to your own neighborhood and see if someone knew you. So what these folks need to do now, which they didn't have to do before, is find neighbors and people that knew them when they lived in certain places. Just a lot of extra work. Extra work. They're going to put more work. The government's going to put more emphasis on good moral character. What does that mean? I have to show that I'm a good person? Well, you just can't say that. Now you got to really prove that you're a person with good moral character. So more documentation, more letters from people that know you, that you're a good person. They do volunteered and who've done X, Y, and Z. This wasn't required in the past. So, and also the citizenship test has now expanded. It used to be if you got 6 questions right out of 10, now it's 12, I think, out of 20. So the fear is there, the obstacles have increased, and the last insult to injury is that until they become U.S. citizens, they're vulnerable to being arrested, even at the interview. Because now, the officers that used to interview people, with citizenship or green card, have now been armed to arrest them on the spot. They don't have to call ICE. They could do it on their own. So USCIS has been recruited as an enforcement arm of the U.S. government. And so that's a big change. So citizenship has become more difficult. It can't be taken for granted. And any attorney that handles these matters needs to manage the expectations of these people so they're not misled into thinking that this is a pretty easy process. I've been a legal permanent resident for 8 years, 10 years. Pay my taxes. I should have no problem. Not good enough anymore. You got to prove you're really a good person. You got to prove where you lived. And you better be able to pass that civic test. And so those are some of the changes just on citizenship. Even if you're granted citizenship, as they just did in Minnesota last week, the fraud investigators are looking at all the approved applications to say a green card. And they're investigating whether these people were really married to begin with. It's fear. It's fear. It's also a way to bottle up the system. And those are some of the changes that have occurred on the immigration landscape. No stone has been left unturned to make it difficult to enter this United States legally and to assimilate I cannot tell you how treacherous it is, for practitioners to monitor these changes, which occur virtually daily. As one of my colleagues says, every Friday, a new development occurs from this government just to make our weekends horrible. Every Friday, we seem to get a new update, a new law. It's just going to make it harder and harder for an immigrant to do things legally. So those are some of the changes.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Favas. And before we invite Christina, uh, could you speak a little bit more about what the community can do with this information? You just shared a lot of helpful things, and I didn't know about how much more difficult it has become for someone. My parents hold green cards, and it's just became way more difficult. But for us as community members who are advocates, what are some of the things we can do based on the things you have been telling us to help our immigrant neighbors?
That's a really key question. It's one thing to listen to the problems, maybe to get upset and depressed. Well, what can we do? I put a sheet out there and says, what can we do? I have given you a roadmap of who you can contact to get involved, to help. I put their email address in there, their web address, their telephone. There's about 6 or 7 organizations right here in Massachusetts that you can engage with and do something and not feel sidelined. So that's one tangible thing that I've learned here and people can embrace when they leave. The most important thing, and I've said this previously, is to remember that in your community, you have people, not just citizens. You have people. And people are what make the community strong. Gatherings like this is what's critical at this stage to protect our civil liberties, our due process, our freedom. We are pretty much now the last barrier. The institutions of Congress has crumbled. They're gone. Don't expect the Supreme Court to bail us out. A shadow docket where they're not issuing reasoned decisions are proliferating. That's horrible. So tangibly, the last guardrail is us. And that's why, as former judge, I am speaking loudly about not only attack on just due process in the courts, but also an attack on our civil liberties and how easily perceptions of who you are drive this administration. You want proof of how perception is deadly under this administration? Maybe you've heard that about 67 people have been murdered in the Pacific Ocean and in the Caribbean by our military. Our president has said, we perceive these to be drug runners, so we'll kill them. We just kill them. Extrajudicial killings are happening in front of our very eyes. What's to prevent someone in power to say, well, I perceived him to be a drug runner. Well, now I'm going to perceive you to be an enemy of the state. We're going to take care of you. This is how dangerous it is. And what's even more dangerous is the acquiescence from Congress. How many of them have spoken up to object to this? Just a few. This is horrible. So the threat is to all of us. Let's fight and coalesce as communities to preserve our civil liberties. The immigration issue is just one of many battles that have to be fought. And that's the only way to describe it.
Thank you. And I know I said we're going to invite Christina next, but I had, just because of what you said, with the community rising up to help. And I think I have been following your work ever since you left. And I know I saw something about you having this document. You've been in touch with other people throughout the country that were former employees. So just in case people think that this is only happening here, it does here. It's all throughout the country, right? People are being fired, and you've been hearing from all over. And so number one is not just here, but also number two, there are people of courage like you who are joining this fight, who are speaking out, and that we can be inspired to join in the courage, because as you said, we as a people must rise up and do the fight, because the people who were expected to do it are not doing it. So can you just speak a little bit to the people who've been talking, this, I don't know if it's a network of this former employees, what you've been hearing, and what, about their courage, the way they have been speaking up as well.
Sure. I'm part of an organization of former Department of Justice employees called Justice Connect. 282 of us signed a letter that was presented to the Judiciary Committee by Senator Schiff while Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, was being questioned. Uh, this letter basically acknowledged the attack on due process. It acknowledged the usurpation of law by the Department of Justice, which I now call the Department of Injustice. This is a department that has used four-letter words to disregard what federal judges have ordered them to do. We just appointed the Department of Justice official that used the four-letter words to denigrate Justice Frosbury. He's now a judge in the Third Circuit of Court of Appeals. He's being positioned maybe for the Supreme Court. This nightmare is now a judge. Excuse my French, but that's exactly who he is. Other judges beyond the speaking out to rest the country, Jennifer Payton, former Assistant Chief Immigration Judge, who was fired because she let Senator Durbin attend and see what was happening at the Chicago Immigration Court. Senator Durbin was exercising his oversight responsibilities as a U.S. Senator. But for extending that courtesy to the senator, she was fired. We have senior judges out in San Francisco, Hila Dice, and others, 9-10 years on the bench, fired because they were perceived to have a high grant rate for asylum. There's about a good 9 or 10 judges that have been fired that are speaking nationwide, from Virginia and Annandale Court, Chicago, San Francisco. Of course, me and Chelmsford. Chelmsford's received a lot of publicity because we're one of the most devastating courts that have seen fires. We had about 18 judges in 2024. We're down to 5. We'll be down to 4 by Christmas, I think. And that's it. You've gone from 18 judges in this new court to about 4 to 5 judges. How are they going to handle their cases? They can't. They just appointed 2 new judges, and I'll tell you, they don't know anything about the law that we have in immigration land. They don't know anything about asylum, yet they're judges. This is who's coming in to replace us, people with absolutely no experience in immigration law. So this is happening nationally. It's not just here, but those of us that are speaking, it's across the country. It's not local. But because we are speaking, more judges are speaking out. The former attorneys and officials for the Department of Justice are really a tight-knit group fighting back. And we're out there almost every day reminding people what is wrong with this governance. And the Department of Justice, which has now become a personal warfare for the President of the United States. This is not hearsay. You have a president who's going on Truth Social telling Pam Bondi, I want you to arrest Comey, I want you to arrest Letitia James, and others. And then what do they do? After the Department of Justice attorneys say, we can't file these charges. The evidence is not sufficient. We're going to fire you, Mr. Attorney. We need to hire another attorney to file the charges. This is the insanity that now prevails with the Department of Justice, of which the immigration courts are part of. And I didn't say this earlier. The immigration courts are not what we call Article 3 courts, where we're part of the judiciary, where the judges have tenure and they can't be fired. The immigration judges fall under the Department of Justice, and the department that we're part of is called the Executive Office of Immigration Review, or EOIR. So the Department of Justice, the Attorney General, appoints us, and they can fire us. We don't have the protection that the other judiciary courts have. We're not part of the judiciary. We're part of the executive branch, which is why it's been so much easier for this administration to just dismantle the court system. That's what's allowed them to do it. So institutionally, that's how we are situated. So, but the national outspoken partnership that we have with our other judges is out there. It's national. It's coast to coast. It was an article that just came out last night in a publication called Law 360. You want to read a hard-hitting article about myself and other judges telling it like it is? It's in print. One of my quotes in that article is that we as judges were treated less than dogs by this administration. I'm telling you, it was hostile before this administration came in. I can't go into the details, but our job was extremely difficult, not just with the backlog of cases we had to prepare for, but the way you were treated within this institutional system. I'm glad I went through it because I saw the inside. I saw how the sausage is made. It's not a pretty sight. But because I saw how a sausage is made, you need to know how it's made. And you need to know how vulnerable we all are. If they can dismantle an entire court system willy-nilly within 8 months, your civil liberties are not too far behind that. So I'll leave it at that.
Yes, indeed. So now, we'd like to invite the attorney. I'd like Judge introduce her. And yes, will step down and come up. Get into more legal land here, and I guess head talk more about.
Thank you, Lorena. Thank you. I'm going to introduce to you Lucina Tosino Miller, who's an attorney with Magaleta McCarthy and Minner, PC here in Boston. Christina works with my law firm, Happus Legal, as of counsel with her firm because I wanted someone on the ground in Massachusetts in case we needed to help anybody here. My life. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. Miss Miller's firm has been we've teamed up with her firm to make sure that we have a presence, a physical presence right here in the Boston area. And I'll give you a brief background of Christina because you need to hear this. Yeah, Christina is an experienced immigration attorney with nearly 8 years of practice. She began her career in private practice before serving as an assistant chief counselor for the Department of Homeland Security. And she was there for about 2 years. And now currently she's in private practice at Magaleta and McCarthy and Nader PC, where she represents clients in removal proceedings, including detained matters, and she handles a wide range of affirmative immigration cases, including family-based petitions and overseas processing and naturalization applications. So I'm happy to introduce you to Christina, where she'll go into more depth about the detention and bonds issues that I touched upon earlier today. Without further ado, I'll leave to you.
Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So, what I wanted to talk about first is what the system looked like before this administration. So, when an individual was encountered by an ICE officer, they would typically be placed in removal proceedings. And that starts with the issuance of a notice to appear or an NTA. This provides procedural due process and protections for individuals in removal proceedings. A judge has to first find that the person is removable from the United States, and then that individual gets to apply for different forms of relief, like asylum or a family-based grief card, or what's called cancellation of removal. Now, during this process, most individuals, with some exceptions, were eligible if they were ever detained. They would be eligible to request a bond. They also receive other procedural protections. If an immigration judge denies their application for relief, they would be able to seek appellate review before the Board of Immigration and then with other circuit courts. On the other hand, we have what's called expedited removal proceedings, and that is usually only reserved for individuals who have been here for less than 2 years. Expedited removal carries with it less protections, and a decision is made by an immigration officer, by an ICE officer, not an immigration judge. Someone is not entitled to request a bond to be released for the pendency of their proceedings, and the relief that they have is more limited, and it's usually limited to just requesting essentially establishing a credible fear of return to their home country. Now, should they receive an adverse finding on their credible fear, they get limited review by an immigration judge, but they do not get the benefit of any appellate review. When someone in removal proceedings were able to request bond, there are two types of arguments. There is one, mandatory detention, and second is discretionary detention. Now, when someone gets to request a bond under discretionary detention, the government, at least in Massachusetts, the government has the burden to show that the individual is either a danger by clear and convincing evidence, or that they are a flight risk by a preponderance of the evidence. If they cannot establish one or the other, the individual can be released upon payment of a bond. Now, there are some individuals who are also subject to what's called mandatory detention, meaning an immigration judge does not have the jurisdiction to hear their request for a bond case. So what's changed with this administration is that the government has expanded the use of expedited removal proceedings. They have filed motions to dismiss cases of individuals who are in removal proceedings so that they can commence expedited removal proceedings, and that would render them detained under the mandatory detention provision. What we have also seen, the government has changed their position on who is eligible for bond. They are now saying, no matter when you entered, but if you entered the United States unlawfully 10 years ago, a year ago, 20 years ago, you are no longer eligible to seek bond or request bond from a judge. So what are your options? We have gone to the federal courts to intervene, and we file what are called habeas corpus petitions. And what's a habeas? That is a challenge to detention. We are going to the federal courts to argue that these individuals are eligible to request a bond and should have the opportunity to have a hearing so that their bond case can be heard. And that is what we are doing. And when it comes to habeas petitions, time is of the essence. We want to make sure that when our clients are detained, that they can be transferred out of Massachusetts. They are detained, let's say, at Burlington. Within a day, they're in Batavia, New York. The day after that, they're transferred to Texas, and they are just be moved around from place to place where they can no longer easily access their attorney. And then we can figure out what is going on. So it is extremely important to make sure that you have an attorney who knows what they are doing, who can help this individual in filing a habeas petition, and that would then lead them to be able to request bond hearings.
That is a very detailed rendition of how the government has expanded the use of expedited removal. Expedited removal, as you heard, avoids the Fifth Amendment protection of due process. You're mandatorily detained. You don't have a right to a bond. And as I said earlier, the federal courts, district courts have pretty much slapped down the government's attempt to expand expedited removal. However, it means that the respondent, the immigrant, has to have an attorney most of the time to go file this. As Ms. Miller has just identified, minutes count before they move the individual to another part of the country. And maybe Ms. Miller can expand on a little bit. But are you aware of how well the Department of Homeland Security has complied with judicial instructions after the habeas petitions are blended?
I think the audience reaction tells her everything.
She's right. You have a federal judge that'll tell the Department of Homeland Security, you can't move this person out of this area. And what do? They move the person out of the area. And the attorney for the respondent, the immigrant, now has to go back to federal court. The judge has to call the department back in. Why did you move him? And some far-flung excuse will emerge. It's not an isolated incident. There's over 50 federal petitions that have been granted. There's a professor at NYU that's compiled all this. He was on 60 Minutes, actually, about a week and a half ago, where the judges are basically, in legal terms, screamed at the Department of Homeland Security for violating their own edicts. So, yes, the petitions are being granted, But there's a history also of the department just ignoring him and creating even more the immigrant. So that dovetails on what as Miller just said. Uh, and I think what you want to maybe touch upon what you made is there is a case called Hartada. We don't have to go into detail on that, but maybe you could explain why immigration judges are now saying they have no jurisdiction to hear a bond request. Maybe we want to touch that a little bit.
So when the government changed their position that anyone who crossed the border, no matter when they entered, were ineligible to request a bond, this went up on appeal. And then we received a decision from the Board of Immigration that says, sure enough, you entered without inspection. No matter when you entered, you are ineligible to request a bond. And so now the judges are saying, our hands are tied. We can't hear your case, which begs the need to have the federal courts intervene. Only then, when we have an order from a federal judge, can we go back to the immigration court and request a bond hearing, where if it's still in Massachusetts, the burden is on the government to show that our clients are either a danger or they're a flight risk.
Minutes count. So if it's not my law firm, Pappas Legal, if it's not Magaleta, McCarthy later, you need to have a lawyer's phone number ready to go in case something happens. So in addition to preparing the papers that I talked about earlier, have an attorney on standby. You've already consulted with them. And I'm going to let Ms. Mills talk about one other item, which is crucial if you really want to prepare these families for an eventual arrest and detention. And that's having a signed G28. And you could talk a little bit about the G28.
Yes, a G28 is a notice of appearance, and that contains information of an individual's lawyer, as well as the individual's information, their name, their alien registration number, their phone number, and their address. And it needs to be signed by both the individual and their lawyer. But being able to carry that around should you have any encounter with ICE, then at least ICE is aware that you are represented. And then that would allow you to more easily access, at least for us, to be able to more easily access our clients when ICE knows that they are represented.
Absolutely. Anything else you want to come?
That's about it.
Okay. Lorena, where's Goena? She just walked down. There she is over there. Lorena, did you want to bring our state senator butt up here? Becky.
Thank you so much. Thinking about before this whole thing started, many of us didn't know much about immigration or immigration laws. And I feel like we're all becoming kind of not experts, but definitely highly educated on the matter. Don't you think?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for you guys for speaking. Actually, mostly though. So now it is my pleasure to introduce my friend and state senator Jamie Aldridge. Jamie Aldridge represents the Middlesex and Worcester district. He's also been an avid advocate for marginalized communities throughout Massachusetts and working families, and many times taking a stand where others chose to stay silent. So if you've been doing advocacy work, you probably have either met or heard of him. He will also talk about legislation he has introduced to meet this moment. And in fact, he had already started working on this before this whole crisis really exploded. So he'll share more about that. But please help me in welcoming Senator Jamie Aldridge.
Wasn't sure if I was sitting down. So, good afternoon, everyone, and you, Lorena, thank you so much for organizing this and all of the immigrant support networks, including the divisible chapters, and seeing a bit of a theme here as far as many immigrants getting inspired to run, because as Judge Pappas knows, Lorena is running for legislature, and also I believe Representative Bana Howard is here. Representative, are you here? Yes. So Representative House, current state representative, we work very closely on many issues, and now running for the special state senate election in the Lowell area. So thank you so much, Representative, for showing up at so many things. We partnered together about a lot of actually refugee issues, especially Representative Howard being a refugee coming here from Cambodia. But in terms of the state of where things are really at the state level, and I so appreciate Judge Kaff's comments and insights and Attorney Miller, is that I think, first of all, it's important to realize that as frustrating as it is at the state level, there are things we can do both at the state policy level. I know so many people here are involved with LUCE and other organizations to observe and bear witness to what's happening to so many undocumented immigrants. And I would just say that has to, keep up doing that work, because I hope what you realize is that a lot of Americans, including those that are perhaps more conservative, there really is a shift. I think, when I interact with those who are more conservative or sort of were kind of focused, perhaps obsessed about quote unquote illegal immigration, is that, often the thought is, well, yeah, I thought the Trump-Vance administration was going to go after the criminals, and realizing that well over 70% from statistics of undocumented immigrants who are getting arrested, detained, have no criminal history. Seeing the impacts in our communities, workplaces, farms. So I think it really is moving people, and as frustrating as it can be, the work that so many people here in the room are doing really is having an impact to move those people in the middle. And if we're really serious about moving people in the middle, not to get too political, but thinking about next year in the election, you have to think about how to connect immigrant stories with voters that have a lot of conflicting views on immigration. So certainly that's what I try to do. As Rita mentioned, and so appreciate her leadership in this whole sort of region, is that I am very outspoken to support undocumented immigrants, constituents of mine, people I know who have been detained in the district I represent. As probably a lot of people here know, I represent this area, the Acton, Foxborough area, but also the Hudson Marlborough area, where there's a particularly large population of Brazilian and Central American immigrants. The Brazilian community has been very hard hit. And so just so people have a sense of the work that I do, is that it really began almost immediately. I think one of my constituents was one of the first Massachusetts residents to get picked up by ICE under President Trump in his second term, is a gentleman named Lucas from Marlborough. And immediately working with an attorney, and I appreciate Attorney Miller saying, so important to have an attorney to make sure that as I talk to immigrants that I know, friends about their constituencies who are fearful that they could get targeted by ICE, is to make sure you would have a lawyer. Is I wrote a character letter of character, speaking to the person's good character, ties to church, married with kids, hardworking, owning a business. Is often those things to make a difference with an immigration judge. I'd be the first to say it. It's just so scary to hear what Judge Pappas is saying, is how quickly things are changing. The habeas that Attorney Miller mentioned, that is really right now, I think, the main way that people are getting out of ICE detention. So I'll just give a quick example. Is that a Littleton resident about 2 months ago, so a constituent of mine, who, this is where immigration gets so confusing, is yes, he is undocumented, but he has a work permit. So he was working legally in Massachusetts, actually at a hospital, but he was targeted by ICE, arrested at his workplace, and within a few days he was sent to an ICE facility in Mississippi. which I can't even imagine what that was like. And so immediately, actually, Northeastern Law School through their clinic started representing the gentleman. And then I don't think it made a huge difference, but I did write a letter of support for him, speaking about his ties and his work and, contributing in the healthcare industry. And he, through the habeas petition, if you will, he was released last week by a judge in Mississippi and had a bond of $1,500. And so then some members of the community raised the money, and he will arrive tonight to Logan Airport at midnight. So we're gonna be. So there are, fighting back can have an impact. I'll just finish and say, because happy to, take your questions or whatever is best is on the policy front. There are things we can do at the state level. And so I have filed in speaking of what Loretta talked about how long I've been in this battle, if you will, is that I began filing the Safe Communities Act during the Obama administration. That's because sadly, the Obama administration had a very large number of deportations. I think it was tied to he was hoping to pass immigration reform. Unfortunately, that was not successful, during his time. But anyhow, that's when I began filing this bill. So it's been, obviously many years. And the bill does four things. Is first of all, it makes sure that police are not asking people their immigration status, because often that can lead to someone receiving a summons to go to court or whether intentionally or not, some connection to federal immigration reform. So that's the first piece. The second is that there are these things called 287G agreements, which right now there are not any in Massachusetts except for the Department of Correction. But some county sheriffs used to have them, and it would actually allow sheriffs to deputize their employees to act as immigration agents, which is very chilling. The idea of having state, or local officials, law enforcement act as immigration officials. If you look at New Hampshire, if you look at, obviously states that are much more conservative, many of the police departments are actively also sort of deporting people as well, which is incredibly scary. So thank goodness that doesn't happen in Massachusetts. But we want to prohibit it, make sure that perhaps a more conservative sheriff might try to sign such an agreement. So that's the second piece. Third is that if someone does get arrested, for a criminal offense, but is undocumented, to inform that person that they have the right to hire a lawyer. And as has already been said many times today, to have a lawyer makes all the difference in the world for someone, getting out of detention. And then the last piece is making sure that police and court personnel, because so many immigrants, undocumented immigrants, are getting picked up outside of courthouses. And these are, not those that are just going to court because of a criminal offense. They're going as witnesses. They're going as victims. They're going to, pay a fee. But ICE is often outside courthouses, including in my district, in the Marlborough District Court. So it would prohibit police and court personnel from informing ICE that someone in the courthouse, someone in the police station is undocumented. ICE does have a way to find out if someone, has a record. These are national databases, but at the very least, let's make sure that local police and court personnel are not informing ICE that someone in the community is undocumented. So those are the four things of the Safe Communities Act. I just heard it does have a hearing date, so it's November 25th. So really want to encourage you to reach out to your legislators, your state rep and state senator. Of course, Representative Howard and I, and I'd say most legislators in this area are already co-sponsors, but making sure your state rep and state senator are co-sponsors, then obviously if you can make it to the State House on that day, that would be incredible. So I think the last part I'll just say is a lot of my advocacy has been, and some of it has already been referenced, is making sure, and our Attorney General has been extremely vigilant at putting out advisories on people's rights, but from a private property point of view, making sure it's clear that, not just for undocumented immigrants in their in their home or if they own a business, but just all of us, making sure it's clear that if ICE does try to come into a private space, that they cannot do that, that they can be prohibited for entering that space unless they have a judicial warrant. So the specific issue I've been focused on is that unfortunately there have been some ICE who have been staging in the restricted parking of police departments, which I think is disgraceful because it kind of destroys the trust between immigrants and police to say police are not, they're not engaged in immigration enforcement. So really trying to reach out to all the police chiefs in departments about, what are the rights to prevent someone from ICE for staging in such an area. I know that David Martin is here from the Acton Select Board. He's been really leading the effort at Acton on asking these questions and asking me to get advisories from the Attorney General. So I appreciate his leadership at the local level, and we need to see what happens at the local government level as well. So that's sort of a bit of a summary of the work that I've been doing. So
Very good. Thank you so much, Senator. For me, in my mind, as an advocate, and I'm hearing about the bill, how important it is. I like the people here to leave with something also prepared for people who might be against the bill. Like we know, I've heard, and I believe it keeps communities safer, right? I have a friend from the Greater Lowell area who was a domestic violence survivor who, told me because of due to me undocumented, she reached out, is it safe to go to the police? So with that in mind, could you expand a little more, like when you talk about the Safe Communities Act, and it is to keep our communities safer, and someone who say what might not agree that the police should not cooperate with ICE, how can we respond and say, indeed, it does keep our communities safer?
yeah, great question, and that was the message of naming the bill the Safe Communities Act is making the point that involving local and state police or law enforcement in immigration reform makes us all less safe. Because if there happens to be a crime in a community where someone observes that crime, but someone in that family is undocumented, he or she is going to feel afraid to call the police to report that crime, to go to court, possibly to be a witness. You want to have that trust. And I will say, my sense really is the law enforcement in this whole region, whether Lowell, Acton, Littleton, really have gotten that because it actually makes their job harder. And for a lot of them, it's just they don't want to have to be involved in enforcing immigration law. But the law, you want to make sure it's clear in the law because there are some communities where unfortunately there might be a police officer, perhaps a more conservative officer who might, whether intentionally or not, actually cause someone to get picked up by ICE. There's a bit different news stories. It's been a little unclear about whether or not that's happening in Massachusetts, but we want to make sure there's a bright line there. So yeah, it does make communities safer. And as we know, so-called sanctuary cities, though sanctuary is really kind of just a political term, but when a community does take action, and I credit Acted for basically passing policies that are similar to what, say, a Boston has passed, it really does make the community safer because then everyone in the community feels safe to interact with the police.
Very good. Thank you so much, Senator. And so just we can leave here, I want to make sure everybody took note on the bill's hearing date is November 25th.
Yes, that's right.
All right. So I'd love to see a big showing of support at the State House on November 25th. If you have any questions about logistics, I'm sure you can reach out to the Senator's office and his staff will be providing you with more information. But it's very important for us to stay engaged and advocate strongly because the more support this bill gets, the more likely, hopefully, it will pass. So I hope we can count on everyone here to join in supporting this bill.
And Mad, one quick thing is I should have mentioned at the beginning is on the budget front, the legislature, and again, it's actually passed in the House. So credit the House for passing it and then the Senate agreed to it, is that we dedicated $5 million to the immigration defense funds. And that money through the state office of immigrant and refugees is now going out to law firms, lawyers, nonprofits like Bureau to defend people who are getting detained. So in my district, there's just a few lawyers that do this kind of immigration work. This is extraordinarily difficult. Some of them are getting these grants now to hire an additional attorney just to do this work. So we want to make sure that was funded for this year's budget. We want to make sure it's funded for next year's budget. And I would argue, given what's happening in the streets, that it's doubled or tripled. It should be far more funding to support immigrants in our communities. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Up next, we will have our Q&A. So I'd like to invite Dr. Pavas and Attorney Miller to come back up here. And my friend Susan will be reading the questions. Did any other elected officials arrive before, after I called for acknowledgement? I think I saw Rep. Dancina here early. Yes, I want to acknowledge and thank you for your presence. And to select board members or
Did you like the question card?
we have collected the cards.
I can grab any cards that we didn't collect yet. Do you want to pass them to the end of the row?
All right. So Susan in the Maibas.
Was that?
Oh, okay.
Well, is that a better place for her to stand for the camera? Just sure.
Testing.
Testing. Yeah. So, as we know, these are handwritten. I'm hoping I can read your handwriting. I had a nurse, so I'm really used to eating scrawls. The first question is a two-part, but I'm going to read it kind of together. They're two separate questions, but they go hand in hand. Okay? And I can repeat if we need. If immigrant parents are detained, what happens immediately to children? Does DCF take over and do they go into foster care? Will court recognize pre-designated caregivers that the family has approved? That's the first one. Secondly, please discuss protections for SIJ visa holders, which is the special immigrant juke.
We'll go on to the first question. If a parent is taken into detention, jail, and there's children involved, which is another reason why earlier I said, if that parent or that family had a power of attorney or guardianship set up, they wouldn't have to worry about the children in terms of who would take care of them. Obviously, with nothing in place legally to take care of the care and custody of the children, Department of Social Services is probably going to be called in. Your children will be vulnerable to state action. You preserve their care and protection and welfare. So to mitigate that, power of attorney or guardianship is key to prevent that from happening. That's preemptive action. It's preparation. You don't want to be a parent stuck in that situation. You got two young children and you're held in detention. If there's no family around, it gets hit even more. It's even more imperative that you have that type of agreement or power of attorney in place. So preparation is the key, because if you don't have a power of attorney or legal guardianship, the state's going to be involved in taking care of the children. And I'll leave it at that. So that's my answer. First part of the question.
Regarding SIJ, so SIJ is Special Immigrant Juvenile, and it is a petition that is granted to children who can show that they have either been abandoned or abused or neglected by one parent or both, and that it is not in their best interest to return to their home country. The petition creates a pathway to be eligible to apply for residency. The issue is there are only so many visas or green cards that are available in this specific category. And with so many children receiving SIJ, it created a massive backlog that only so many can be granted per year. That designation is made by the Department of State. And it has created a backlog so bad that right now they are processing petitions that were filed in July of 2020.
Oh, yeah.
And what happened it was several years ago, the administration started granting what's called deferred action to these children. And deferred action not only created a way for these kids when they're teenagers or they become older to be eligible to apply for a social, to be able to enroll in school, but to also to be able to work. But it also did create a little layer of protection. And that deferred action might be the reason why a judge in immigration court would be willing to terminate removal proceedings against a child because that deferred action was granted. This administration has taken away deferred action for these kids. Those that have been granted keep their deferred action and is good for a period of 4 years. But we have also seen cases where deferred action has been revoked. So in terms of protection, unfortunately, it does not protect someone from detention. It is a basis or a reason to try and get them out of detention or to try and terminate proceedings entirely. But unfortunately, until they're eligible to apply for that green card, the protections are a little more limited than they used to be. And when someone is detained, and they could be at this point 25 years old with an approved SIJ petition, but if their priority date, which that is when they filed their application and that determines when a green card would be eventually available to them, if that is not current or near current, a judge would not be able to consider any potential application for a green card until it becomes current. So to answer the question, there are limited protections for those who do receive SIJ.
Thank you. This may have been answered by Senator Eldridge, but there may be additional information that can be added. Recently, a funding bill was passed with seed funding for a legal defense program for immigration cases. Would you give us a status update for that program?
Not a little bit of the status. Great. The only status update I give on that program is I was recently approached to actually help teach newly admitted attorneys as part of this program. I think about $5 million was allocated or approved by the state to help expand the number of attorneys that could help immigrants. So I'm one of probably 3 judges that's being tagged to train and introduce immigration law to more of these attorneys. But that funding comes from that state bill. That's the only update I have. So I've become part of the program.
Great. Appreciate it. Thank you. Tight. I can read it. Many who support uncontrolled immigration often cite the, quote, "we're all immigrants" argument to justify it. While the scale and nature of immigration under the last administration were vastly different from any historical pattern. How do you respond to those who claim that open borders and uncontrolled immigration are compatible with a stable, functioning society?
There's no politics in that question, is there? Well, there's a phrase in that question. It's called uncontrolled, i.e., open borders. That's part of the presumption in this question. Remember President Obama? He was tagged as the deporter in chief. The senator alluded to this earlier. He became the deporter in chief because he wanted to show Speaker Boehner just how tough a Democratic president could be at the border. So he deported everybody from the border and became the deporter in chief. He did this because he felt that if I am tough on immigrants coming without authorization into the country, we could pass comprehensive immigration reform. Speaker Boehner didn't like that. He wanted piecemeal reform. They had a retreat in Cambridge, Maryland that year. And after that retreat at the Republican caucus, their next policy response to President Obama was, we don't trust you. We're not going to do anything with you. We'll wait you out. And so there was no attempt from the right to address undocumented immigrants from entering the United States. Obama tried to be tough to show we're on the same page. We'll do more work at the border. Fast forward to 2025. Guess what happened in 2024? We had an agreement, a bipartisan agreement, comprehensive immigration reform. It was ready to go. But one person said no. And that person was the candidate called Donald J. Trump. And he says, do not pass this bipartisan bill. I need it for the election. In other words, I need a push button issue to galvanize my base. So when you insert a phrase like uncontrolled into your question, you're just bypassing all the elements and obstacles that our current president put into place that could have controlled the massive influx from the South. Now, what else happened under Biden? The question assumes Biden just allowed people to come in willy-nilly, open borders. No, we have a law that's called asylum law. We signed as a country into the 1967 protocol, the UN protocol that protects refugees or immigrants, asylum seekers. In 1980, it was incorporated into U.S. law. So under U.S. law and international law, people who fear persecution have a right to seek asylum in the United States. Well, President Biden adhered to that and says you have a claim, fine, we'll give you some legal status. You come in, you can apply for a work authorization. That was a controlled entry of a lot of people. Okay, it wasn't uncontrolled. What's uncontrolled today is a violation of U.S. asylum law at the border. Because this administration will say, well, we've stopped the flow. No, you did. You violated U.S. law to do that. They have a right to seek asylum. If you don't like the law, revoke it. But if you're going to follow the law, these people need to come into the United States if they have a legitimate fear of persecution. We have systems set up at the border to vet whether people have at least what we call a prima facie, a sufficient basis to seek asylum in the United States. They're not just let in. These are called credible fear interviews. And if they pass the credible fear interview, they're allowed to come into the United States to pursue their asylum hearing. Our president has torched that process out the door. That's why the flow has stopped from the border. So we have an uncontrolled, illegal assault on the law that protects refugees. We have a law that says they have a right to do that. So the premise of the question says uncontrolled. Well, the Republican Party had a chance, and they agreed with the Democrats to pass a comprehensive bill. But they let their candidate pull it away. They spent months hashing out this bill that would have given billions to border enforcement. That bill was not going to elect border enforcement, but there were other opportunities in that bill for a legal pathway for many people to enter the country legally as opposed to paying smugglers. Here's the tragedy of all of this. Congress could pass laws tomorrow to stop the deluge of people trying to come into the country without authorization. All they have to do is pass a bill that increases the amount of visas available for these countries, and instead of these individuals risking their lives, paying smugglers, there would be a real line that they can get into to apply for work authorization. We didn't say green card. We didn't say citizenship. Why is that important? Because we have U.S. companies that are desperate for workers. They need these workers. Why? Because these workers don't necessarily take American jobs. Another myth. Immigrants complement U.S. workers. I'll give you an example. Take a restaurant. You have undocumented folks currently washing dishes, bussing tables. Well, if Americans don't want those jobs, and they don't, the waitresses don't have a job, the cooks don't have a job, the restaurant owner doesn't have a business, he's not paying taxes, these immigrants will complement U.S. jobs, not take away jobs. Yes, there's some marginal substitution. But in the aggregate, if we bring these people in, legal status, in a controlled way, we all win. We all win. So the question is really using a premise of uncontrolled that ignores all the other efforts that were aimed at control immigration into this country. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge, for clearing that up for us. This next question will be helpful for many of us, but we're trying to do it. We can. Explain the immigration law and consequences of harboring or aiding and abetting undocumented immigrants in your home or elsewhere.
In North Carolina, it would be a criminal offense to do that. I'm going to hedge on Massachusetts state law because I haven't come up to speed on that. So what I can say is be careful. If you harbor people that are sought by law enforcement, you may face criminal prosecution. And that includes judges. It includes private homes. So be mindful of the law. I didn't tell you it is a crime. I'm hedging here. It might. I wish I could have the statute in front of me that says whether that's a crime or not. But if you have immigrant fugitives that are being sought and you're harboring them, there may be a risk of prosecution against you. Check the law out. I wish I had the law in front of me. I don't. I know a lot of things about immigration. That one I'm going to push off on a little bit. So that's the best I can do.